I'm Hannah Jackson, 44 years old, and I spent 22 years flying special operations missions in the United States Army, putting aircraft into places that don't show up on any map to bring our people home. For most of those years, I made myself small for a family that only ever celebrated the men who wore the tab. Including the father I would have given anything to make proud. But the night a Green Beret cornered me at the officers' club and told me to go wait in the lobby, and my own father agreed, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed by the very people you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. The house I grew up in sat at the end of a gravel road near a Southern Army post, and the whole rhythm of our lives bent around one man and the regiment he served. My father kept his boots by the door in a line so straight you could have used it to sight a rifle. He kept his medals in a drawer he never opened in front of us, and his stories for men who had earned them. When I was a girl, I thought every family ran on schedules and silence. I thought every father measured love in the distance he kept. My father could recite the names of men he served with for 30 years. He could tell you what they did, where they fell, what they said the last time he saw them. He could not, I think, have told you what I wanted to be when I grew up. It was not cruelty. It was just that his attention pointed somewhere else, the way a compass points north, whether you ask it to or not, and his north was the work, and the men who did the work, and the son he was raising to follow him into it. My brother Daniel was 3 years older than me and the brightest thing in that quiet house. At the kitchen table on weeknights, my father would quiz him on land navigation and call signs and the order of operations for things I did not understand yet. And I would sit at the end of the table and answer first, under my breath, before Daniel could. I was almost always right. My father never seemed to hear it. One night I said the answer out loud, clear, before my brother could open his mouth, and my father set down his coffee and looked at me with something that was not quite annoyance and not quite anything else. "Let your brother answer, Hannah," he said. "This is his table." I was maybe 10 years old. I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that children sometimes have, that there was a table somewhere that would be mine, and that I would have to go find it myself, because no one in this house was going to set a place for me. My mother died when I was 13. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the warm current that ran under all my father's discipline. And when the cancer took her, the house got colder in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. My father retreated into routine the way some men retreat into drink. He ran our home like a small, sad outpost, and I learned to keep it running without being asked. I made the lists. I knew when the bills came. I learned that being useful was a kind of love you could give to people who could not say it back. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. Daniel was kind to me in the way our father was not. He saw me. On the afternoon, he taught me to drive, lurching down that gravel road while he laughed and braced his hand against the dash. He told me something I have carried my whole life. "Dad doesn't get you, hon," he said. "That's his loss, not yours. You're the smartest person in this family and everybody's too busy to notice. You're going to surprise all of them one day. I just hope I'm there to see your face when you do." I believed him because he was my brother and because I needed to believe somebody. I did not know then how much that sentence would have to carry, or how few of the people in that house would still be at the table when the day finally came. There was a training exercise on the post the summer I turned 16. I had ridden my bike to the edge of a parade field at dusk to wait for my father, and a flight of helicopters came in low over the tree line, working the far end of the field, their rotors beating the warm air into something you could feel in your chest. The other kids covered their ears. I stood there with my whole body ringing, and I watched those aircraft move like they knew something the rest of us did not. And I made a decision I told no one. Not my father, who would have called it foolish. Not my brother, who would have believed me. I decided, standing at the edge of a field I was not supposed to want any part of, that the sky was where I would prove it. That one day I would be the one flying, the one they called when it could not be done any other way. I did not have the words for it yet. I only knew that there was a version of my life in which I was not waiting at the edge of the field, and I wanted that life badly enough to keep it secret. the way you keep anything you're afraid someone will talk you out of. People who meet me now see the rank and the bearing, and they assume I came up easy, that doors opened, that someone cleared a path. No one cleared a path. I learned early that I would have to be twice as good to be seen at half the size. And I learned it at my own kitchen table, from a man I loved and who loved me and who could not, for the life of him, look at his daughter and see anything that mattered to him as much as the things that wore a uniform he recognized. I want to be fair to him, even now. My father was a product of his world, and his world was narrow and hard and built entirely around a single brotherhood that did not, in his day, have room for someone like me in it. He was not trying to wound me. He simply never imagined I might be one of the people the stories were about. That is its own kind of wound, the one that comes not from a closed fist but from a man who never thinks to open his hand. So I folded my pride into something small and portable, and I carried it out the door with me when I left for college, and I went looking for the table that would be mine. It took me 22 years to find it. And the night I finally sat down at it, the first person to stand up was a stranger who had just tried to throw me out of the room. By the time I left home, I had stopped expecting my father to celebrate me. What I had not yet learned was how long a person can keep hoping for a thing, even after they have stopped expecting it. That lesson was still ahead of me, and it would arrive, the way the hardest lessons usually do, dressed up as an ordinary evening. When I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the spring of 2004, I wanted exactly one thing from the ceremony, and it was not the gold bars. I had wanted those for years, and I had earned them. What I wanted was a single sentence from my father. I had even imagined the sentence. I had imagined him saying he was proud of me, the way I had heard him say it about Daniel 100 times, and I had imagined what my face would do when he did. I am not too proud to tell you that I practiced not crying. He shook my hand. That was the thing. He shook my hand the way you shake the hand of a junior soldier you have just met, firm and brief and correct. And then he looked at the wings of the people around us, the aviators, and he said the words that set the tone for the next 20 years of my life. Aviation. Well, at least it's the safe choice. I had pinned on gold bars that morning. He heard the word safe and stopped listening. I want you to understand that he did not say it to be cruel. In his mind, he was being generous. In his mind, he was relieved. He had a son in the teams already, a son in the line of fire, and the idea that his daughter had chosen something he believed was safer let him exhale. He did not know the first thing about what I had actually signed up to do. He just heard a word that let him stop worrying about me, which was, I would come to understand, the same as letting him stop thinking about me at all. I stopped expecting the sentence I wanted after that day. I just kept working. Here is what my father did not know about the safe choice. 2 years later, I was flying rotary wing missions on my first deployment, and there was nothing safe about any of it. By 2008, I had been selected and assessed into Army Special Operations Aviation, the part of the force that flies the people my father worshipped into the places that do not appear on any map and flies them back out again when everything has gone wrong. I flew at night, without lights, into valleys where the ridgelines reached up on both sides like hands closing. And I put aircraft down in spaces that should not have fit them, and I lifted men out who would not have come home any other way. That was the safe choice. That was the desk job my family pictured when they pictured me at all. I flew 400 hours one year into places I still cannot name, in a sentence I am allowed to say out loud. I came home from that rotation thin and quiet and changed, and at Thanksgiving that year my father asked my brother twice about his selection course, and never once asked me where I had been. I had learned by then not to volunteer it. Volunteering it only led to one of two outcomes. Either someone's eyes glazed over because they had decided in advance that whatever I did was support work, paperwork, the soft stuff, or someone got uncomfortable because the little they did understand did not fit the story they had already written about me. So I ate my dinner and passed the rolls and let Daniel have the table, the way I always had, the way I was raised to. I loved my brother through all of it. That is the part people find hard to hold. They want the favored child to be a villain, and Daniel never was. He would catch my eye across those holiday tables when the conversation ran past me one more time. And he would give me a small look that said he saw it, he saw me, and that he was sorry, and that he thought I was the best of all of us. It was not enough to fix anything. but it was enough to keep me from going cold, and there were years when that mattered more than I can tell you. The larger thing I was up against was not any one person. It was a culture, an unspoken rule woven through the entire world I had grown up beside and then chosen to serve. The rule was simple, and it was everywhere. The only people who truly counted were the ones who wore the tab. Everyone else was support. Everyone else was in the way until they were needed and forgotten again the moment they were not. I had spent my childhood on the outside of that rule, watching it shape my father, and now I had spent my adulthood on the outside of it again, in uniform this time. Flying the missions, taking the fire, and still being waved toward the lobby by men who had decided what I was before I opened my mouth. I made peace with it, or I told myself I did. I built a career on being undeniable in the cockpit and invisible everywhere else. I was good at my job in a way that did not require anyone's permission, and there is a real freedom in that, in work that is simply true, whether or not it is seen. By the time I made Major in 2014, I had stopped flinching at the slights. By the time I commanded an aviation squadron in 2019, I had a wall of people under me who would have followed me anywhere, and I told myself that their regard was enough, that I did not need the recognition I had wanted at my commissioning, that I had grown past it. I had not grown past it. I had just buried it. And the thing about a thing you bury alive is that it waits. It waits in the dark and it keeps its strength, and then one ordinary evening, in a crowded room full of the very people who had taught me to expect nothing, somebody reaches down and pulls it back into the light, and you discover that the wanting was there the whole time, patient as a stone, waiting for the moment it would finally either break you or set you free. That evening came in the spring of 2026. I had been a colonel for 2 years by then, and I still had not learned the last lesson my father had to teach me, the one he did not know he was teaching, the one that would arrive dressed as an insult from a stranger at a bar. The Special Forces regimental function was held that year at the Post Officers Club at Fort Liberty, the kind of evening where old legends and young operators gather under the same roof and the air is thick with stories and bourbon and the particular gravity of men who have done hard things together. I had been invited because of my position, but that was not why I went. I went because my father was going to be there, an honored guest, a living piece of the regiment's history, and because somewhere in me, at 44 years old, the girl at the edge of the parade field still wanted to stand in his world and have him glad she was there. I made a choice that night that I have turned over in my mind many times since. I did not wear my rank. I came in civilian clothes, a plain dark sweater and slacks, nothing that announced anything. I wanted, for one evening, to be his daughter and not a colonel. I wanted to walk in beside him and just be family in a room full of the thing he loved most. I have thought a long time about whether that was a mistake, and I have decided that it was not. The mistake was never mine. But it did mean that when I walked into that club, every person in it saw exactly what they expected to see, which was a middle-aged woman in a sweater who did not obviously belong. I found my father at the bar, holding court in the gentle way old legends do. A half circle of soldiers around him, young and old, paying their respects. My chest did the thing it always did when I saw him in that element. A complicated warmth, love and hurt braided so tight I had long ago stopped trying to separate the strands. I started toward him. I did not get there. A man stepped into my path. He was a master sergeant, I would learn, a green beret named Brian Hunt, broad and loud and riding the particular swagger of a man a few drinks in and a few days out from a deployment he had been talking about all night. He planted himself in front of me, looked me up and down the way you appraise something that has wandered into the wrong place, and raised his voice just enough for the men around him to hear. "This club is for operators, not tag-alongs," he said. "Go wait in the lobby, sweetheart." A couple of his buddies laughed. One of them said something I did not catch, and the others laughed harder. Hunt was enjoying it now, the audience, the easy target. He half-turned to his friends and jerked a thumb at me. "Somebody's wife wandered in looking for the gift shop," he said. I did not answer him. I have been spoken to like that more times than I could count, and I have learned that the worst thing you can do is hand a man like that the reaction he is fishing for. I simply looked past him, to the bar, to the one person in that room who could end this with a single sentence. My father had heard it. I knew he had heard it because I saw his shoulders change. I waited for him to set down his glass and say the thing fathers in stories say, the thing I had spent 40 years waiting to hear in any form at all. He studied his drink. He did not turn around, and then, quietly, in a voice meant to smooth things over and keep the peace, my father said the words that cut deeper than anything the stranger could have managed. "Hannah, just go wait in the lobby. Don't make a thing of it." 44 years old, 22 of them in uniform, hundreds of combat flight hours, and a wall full of awards and a box I never opened in front of anyone, just like him. And my own father was asking me to step outside so that a stranger could feel important and the evening could go smoothly. I felt the old familiar thing rise up, the instinct to fold myself small and go, to keep the peace, to be useful by being absent. I had obeyed that instinct my whole life. I set my glass down on the nearest table. And I did not move. It was not a decision I made with my head. It came from somewhere older than thought. I just knew, with my feet planted on that floor, that I was not going to wait in any more lobbies. Not that night, not ever again. Hunt's face shifted. He had expected me to scurry off, and when I did not, he stepped closer, using his size, the oldest trick there is. "I don't think you heard me," he started. He never finished the sentence. Because at that moment, across the room, Command Sergeant Major Leonard Pace, the senior enlisted leader of the group, a man with 30 years on him and a reputation that made young soldiers stand straighter just hearing his name, looked up and saw me, and his whole bearing changed in an instant. He set down what he was holding, and he crossed that crowded room with purpose, and the soldiers parted for him the way they always did. And he came to a stop, a respectful step away from me, and snapped to attention. "Colonel Jackson," he said, clear and carrying, in a voice that reached every corner of that suddenly quiet room. "Ma'am, I didn't know you'd be here tonight. The deployment packets are on your desk for your signature, ma'am. Master Sergeant Hunt's rotation is right there on top." I watched it land. I watched it travel across Hunt's face like weather. The swagger went first, then the color, then whatever story he had been telling himself about the woman in the sweater. He understood all at once that the tag-along he had tried to throw out of the room was the officer whose signature would decide when and whether and where he deployed. His mouth opened. "Ma'am," he said, I didn't realize." He had a great many words a minute ago. Now he had none. And at the bar, slowly, my father set down his glass, and for the first time in my entire life, he turned all the way around and looked at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. I want to tell you what I did next, because it matters, and because it is the part people are always surprised by. I did not press the advantage. I had it. The room had turned. Command Sergeant Major Pace was standing at attention beside me, and Master Sergeant Hunt was a shade of gray that no amount of bourbon was going to fix. I could have made him pay right there in front of everyone he had been performing for. I had the rank to do it and the room to do it in. I just did not want it that way. I have never wanted it that way. I nodded to Sergeant Major Pace and thanked him quietly and told him I would see the packets first thing Monday. Then I looked at Hunt, who was bracing for whatever was coming, and I let the moment pass without taking what was offered. "Master Sergeant," I said evenly, the way you speak to someone whose career is, in fact, in your hands. "Enjoy your evening." And I stepped around him, the way he had stepped in front of me, and I walked the rest of the way to the bar to stand beside my father. The men around him had gone silent. They knew now, the way soldiers always know in an instant, when the ground has shifted. Some of them straightened. One older sergeant, a contemporary of my father's, gave me a small nod that carried more respect than my father had managed in 4 decades. I returned it. Then I told my father I was not feeling much like a dinner after all, and that I would call him during the week, and I left before any of them could see my hands shake. Because here's the truth of it. The adrenaline that holds you upright in a moment like that is not made for standing still. It is made for flying. For the thing you do when everything has gone wrong and there is no time to feel it. The second I stepped out into the cool night air of the parking lot, the whole evening caught up with me at once, and I sat in my car for a long time before I trusted myself to drive. It was never really about Hunt. I knew that even then. Hunt was a loud young man who had made an ugly assumption, and the world is full of those. and I had been handling them since before he could grow that beard. If it had only been Hunt, I would have forgotten his name by morning. What I could not forget, what sat on my chest the whole drive home and would not lift, was the sound of my father's voice telling me to go wait in the lobby. Not a stranger, not the culture I'd spent my life pushing against. My own father, with one clean sentence, choosing a stranger's comfort over his daughter's dignity, exactly the way he had chosen it 1,000 times before, in 1,000 smaller ways, across my whole life. When I got home, I did something I almost never do. I called Renee. Lieutenant Colonel Renee Salas had flown with me on the worst night of both our careers, a night neither of us talks about with anyone who was not there, and she is the one person on this earth who knows the exact weight of what I carry, because she carries the matching half of it. She answered on the second ring the way she always does, like she had been waiting, and I told her the whole thing in a flat voice. The bar, and the sweater, and Hunt, and the lobby, and my father. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to say something, and you're going to let me finish." "Okay," I said. "You carried bleeding men out of valleys that kid will never even see the name of," she said. "You put a broken aircraft down on a postage stamp in the dark with people shooting at you, and you brought everybody home. You have done things that the men in that room tell stories about without knowing your name is the answer to half of them. So you do not get to sit in your kitchen tonight and feel small because your father needed a sergeant major to introduce him to his own daughter. You hear me? That is his failure. It was never yours. It has never once been yours." I did not say anything for a while. I could not. "You still there?" she said, gentler now. "I'm here," I said. I think I always believed that if I got high enough, did enough, that one day he'd just see it, on his own, without somebody having to make him. "I know," she said. "And the cruelest thing is that he finally did see it tonight. He just needed a stranger to humiliate you first. That's not a gift, Hannah. Don't you dare let him hand you that and call it a gift." We stayed on the phone a long time after that, the way you do with the person who knew you before the rank. And when we hung up, I poured myself one finger of the bourbon I keep for nights like that, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I made myself look at the thing I had been avoiding all night, which was the question of what came next, because Renee was right that the failure was my father's. But there was another question underneath that one, and it belonged to me alone. Monday morning, Master Sergeant Hunt's deployment packet was going to be sitting on my desk. His name on top, his career and his rotation, and a piece of his future resting under my pen. And the kind of leader I wanted to be, the kind I had spent 22 years wishing my father had been, was going to be decided not in that crowded club, where it was easy, but on Monday morning, alone, where it was hard, with a man who had wronged me reduced to a signature I controlled. I sat with that for a long time. I had every right to be angry. Anger is not the question. The question is what you do with the power that lands in your hands on the worst night, when no one is watching and no one would blame you for using it. I have known people who waited their whole careers to be the one holding the pen, just so they could finally do to someone else what had been done to them. I understood the appeal of it better that night than I ever had before. I felt the pull of it, and somewhere around midnight, with the bourbon untouched and the packets waiting in my mind, I decided who I was going to be. Not because I am a saint, I am not, but because I had spent my whole life being made small by people with power they had not earned the right to use that way. And I was not going to become one more of them just because the chance had finally, conveniently, fallen into my lap. The whole point, the entire point of everything I had endured was to be different. If I used the pen to settle a personal score, then Hunt was right about me. I would be exactly the small, petty thing he had assumed I was. The only way to prove him wrong was to be larger than the moment he had handed me. So I made my decision before I ever drove to headquarters. And then I went to bed, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not lie awake rehearsing all the things I should have said. I had said the only thing that mattered. I had stayed in the room. Monday morning came clear and cold. I got to my office at U.S. Army Special Operations Command before most of the building had filled. The way I have my whole career, because the quiet hour before everyone arrives is when the real work gets done. The deployment packets were exactly where Sergeant Major Pace had said they would be, a stack of them squared on the corner of my desk, and Hunt's was on top, his name printed plain across the tab. I did not open his first. I made myself a cup of coffee, and I worked the stack in the order it came. The way I always do, each soldier's orders reviewed on the merits, on the requirements of the mission, and the readiness of the man, and the needs of the force. When I got to Hunt's packet, I read it the same way I read all the others. His record was good, he was qualified, he was current, his team needed him, and the rotation needed his team. There was not one honest reason to pull him, and a dozen dishonest ones I could have invented if I had wanted to. My deputy, a sharp major who had heard some version of the club story by then, the way these things travel, lingered in my doorway and made a careful offer. "Ma'am," he said, "if you wanted to take a closer look at the Hunt packet, find a reason to hold him back a cycle. Nobody would blink. Just say the word." I did not even look up. "We don't run people's careers on how their night went at the club, Major," I said. "He's qualified. He goes. Sign it and route it." And I signed my name across the bottom of Master Sergeant Brian Hunt's deployment orders, clean and final, the same signature I'd put on every other set that morning, and I slid it into the routing tray and moved on to the next one. It is the closest thing to a victory I have ever felt. That signature. Not because of what it did to him, because of what it did not do to me. He came to see me on Wednesday. He had requested the appointment through proper channels, formal and correct, and he stood in my doorway in his uniform, looking like a man waiting for a sentence to be read. I told him to come in and sit down. He sat on the edge of the chair like it might go off. "Ma'am," he said, "I expected you to bury me." "I know you did," I said. "Most people would have." "I'm not most people, Master Sergeant. Neither are you, or you wouldn't be deploying on that rotation." I let that sit a second. "I signed your orders Monday morning, on the merits, the same as everyone else's. You're going. Nothing that happened at the club is in your file, and nothing's going to be." He looked at me like I had spoken a language he did not have. "Why?" he said, and there was no swagger left in it at all, just a young man genuinely lost. "After what I said." "Because burying you would make this about me," I said. "And it was never about me. You made an assumption about who matters in a room. A lot of people taught you to make that assumption. You're not the first man to look at me and see a tag-along, and you will not be the last. But here's the only thing I expect from you in exchange for those orders, and I want you to actually hear it." I waited until his eyes came up. "Do not ever do to another soldier what you tried to do to me. Not a junior troop, not a spouse, not some person in a sweater you've decided doesn't belong. You don't get to decide who belongs in the room. Go do your job and do it well, and be the kind of leader who shuts that down when he sees it. That's the whole conversation. We're done." He stood, and he came to attention, and the salute he gave me then was a different thing entirely from the stunned reflex at the club. Then he left, and I went back to work, and that, I thought, was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Because there was still my father. He called me Thursday evening, and his voice on the phone was light, almost cheerful, the voice of a man who has decided that an awkward moment has safely passed, and that everything can now go back to the comfortable shape it has always had. He asked if I wanted to come by that weekend. He mentioned in passing that some of the fellows from the club had been asking about me, that one of them had said I was apparently a big deal over at command, said it like it was a charming surprise, a fun fact about his daughter he had just learned, and I realized, listening to him, that he was going to do what he had always done. He was going to let the moment dissolve without ever once saying the thing that needed saying. He was going to skip straight to normal, and normal meant me swallowing it, again, the way I had swallowed everything for 40 years. I did not let him this time. "Dad," I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not change the subject." There was a wariness in his pause. "All right," he said. "When that man told me to wait in the lobby," I said, "I looked at you. You were the one person in that whole room who could have stopped it with one word, and you knew exactly who I was, and you told me to go wait outside, to keep the peace. You chose a stranger's comfort over your own daughter in front of everyone, and you didn't even have to think about it. It came out of you automatic, because you've been doing it my whole life." "Hannah?" he started, and I heard the old defensiveness gathering, the wounded pride. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to keep things smooth. You know how those rooms are." "I know exactly how those rooms are," I said. "I command the people in those rooms. That's my point. You taught me that respect is earned, Dad. You said it to me 100 times growing up, and I went out and I earned it. I earned it everywhere. I earned it in the cockpit, and downrange, and in commands you've never heard of doing things you'll never know about. I earned it everywhere on this earth, except the one place I needed it most. Your table. I could never earn it there, and I finally understand it's because there was never a price I could pay. The door was just closed. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, the cheerfulness was gone, and something rawer had come into his voice, and he reached, the way wounded people do, for the one weapon he knew would hurt me back. Your brother gave everything to this, he said low, and you want to stand there and lecture me about a table. It was meant to end the conversation. It was meant to make me feel disloyal, to make Daniel's memory a wall I could not climb. And the old me would have crumbled right there, would have apologized, would have spent the next month trying to make it up to him. But I had stayed in the room on Saturday night, and it turns out that once you learn how to do that, you can do it on the phone too. Daniel gave everything, I said, and my voice did not shake. And Daniel's the one who told me I was the smartest person in this family and that I'd surprise all of you one day. Daniel saw me, Dad. My dead brother saw me more clearly than my living father ever has. So don't you use him against me. He's the only one of you who would have stood up at that bar. And then, before the conversation could curdle into the old poison, before he could pull me back into the pattern we had run for 4 decades, I told him I loved him and that I would talk to him when we had both had time to think, and I set the phone down. My hands were steady. I sat there in my quiet house, and I waited to feel guilty, the way I always had, and the guilt did not come. What came instead was something I had no name for yet. It felt a little like grief and a little like air. A story like the one from the club does not stay in the club. The regiment runs on grapevine the way an engine runs on oil, and by the middle of the next week, the tale of the colonel in the sweater and the master sergeant who tried to throw her out had made its way through every team room and motor pool on the installation. I did not spread it. I never said a word about it to anyone but Renee. It traveled on its own the way the best stories do, and it changed in the telling, and I let it because the version people were passing around was not really about me at all. It was about something they needed it to be about. I noticed the change before I understood it. Young soldiers I passed in the corridors held doors a half-second longer and met my eyes when before they would have looked through me. It was not fear. I have been around fear, and that was not it. It was the particular regard people give to someone they have decided is the real thing. And it had nothing to do with my rank, which had been on my collar the whole time, and everything to do with the fact that I had stayed in the room and then declined to use the room as a weapon afterward. Soldiers can smell that. They know the difference between authority that protects itself and authority that protects them. One afternoon, a young warrant officer caught up with me in the parking lot. A woman, an aviator, the wings still new enough on her chest to shine. She was nervous, and she got right to it, the way the good ones do. "Ma'am," she said, "I heard about the club. I wanted to say thank you." "You don't have to thank me for anything, Chief," I said. "I've been told to wait in a lot of lobbies, ma'am," she said. And there it was, the thing the whole story was really about. Said plain by a kid half my age who had clearly been carrying it the same way I had carried mine. It mattered that you didn't, that you're up there, that you didn't make yourself small to make it easier on everybody. I needed to see that was possible. So, thank you. I have been given medals that meant less to me than that sentence in that parking lot. I told her so, more or less. I told her that the lobbies do not entirely stop, that I was 44 and still got waved toward them, but that the day comes when you simply stop going, and that the day comes sooner if there is someone ahead of you who already refused. Then I told her to come find me if she ever wanted to talk about flying or about anything, and I meant it, and she has, and she is going to be a far better officer than the world is currently prepared for. That is the only kind of revenge I have ever actually believed in. You do not tear the gate down. You just hold it open for the next one, and the next, until there is no gate left to hold. Hunt, I heard later, had his own reckoning, and it did not come from me. Sergeant Major Pace got hold of him before the deployment, and Pace is not a man who lets things slide. He did not yell, by Hunt's own account. He did something worse. He asked Hunt to imagine that it had been his own little sister in that sweater, his own wife, and some loud stranger had blocked her path and told her to wait in the lobby while a room full of men laughed. He let Hunt sit in that. And then he told him the only thing that mattered. "You want to make it right?" Pace said to him. "I don't want your apology, and the colonel doesn't need it. You make it right by being the kind of team sergeant who shuts that down the second he sees it." Somebody does to another soldier what you did to her, and you are the first one on your feet. That's the only apology that counts in this regiment. The rest is just noise. And my father. My father went home to his quiet house at the end of the gravel road, and I did not hear from him for a while, and I let the silence stand. I found out later, much later, from one of his old friends, what he did during those weeks. He took down the 2 photographs he keeps on the shelf in his front room. One is Daniel in his beret, young and grinning, the picture every family like ours has of the son who did not come all the way home. And the other, beside it, was a small photograph of me at my commissioning in 2004. In my dress uniform with my new gold bars, a photograph I had not even known he kept. His friend told me my father sat with those 2 frames for a long time, that he held them side by side, and that he said, quietly, to a man he had served with for 30 years, that he had spent 22 years looking at one of those pictures every single day, and that he could not honestly remember the last time he had looked at the other, that he had a daughter who had done things that would have made him weep with pride if she had been somebody else's child, and that he had been too busy grieving the son he lost to see the daughter who had been standing right in front of him the whole time, becoming, quietly, without his help or his blessing, exactly the kind of soldier he had spent his whole life admiring. He did not call me to say any of that. He was not ready, and frankly, neither was I. But he had started to look at the photograph he had stopped looking at. And as it turns out, that is where everything that matters actually begins. Not with the grand apology, not with the speech. With an old man alone in a quiet room, finally picking up the frame he had been avoiding and letting himself see what was in it. It would be weeks before he found the courage to do anything about it. And in those weeks, I did something I had never let myself do before. I stopped apologizing for the space I took up. I stopped softening my flight record when it came up. I stopped letting people assume I had come up easy. When a junior officer asked, I told them the truth about the valleys and the night work and the postage stamp landings, not to boast, but because I had finally understood that hiding my own history to make other people comfortable was just one more way of waiting in the lobby. I occupied my authority. I sat at my own table at last, the one I had gone out into the world at 16 to find. And it turned out it had been mine the whole time. I had just been waiting for permission to sit down. The first real step my father took came on an ordinary Saturday, and it did not look like much, which is exactly why I knew it was real. He drove out to the small airfield where I keep a stake in a flying club, where I go on weekends to put a little aircraft up into a quiet sky for no reason other than the love of it. The love that started at the edge of a parade field when I was 16. I had never told him I went there. He found out the way he found out everything, by asking the right old soldier the right quiet question. And one Saturday morning, there he was, standing at the edge of the tarmac in his windbreaker, with his hands in his pockets, 78 years old and out of his depth and not leaving. I walked over to him, not sure what this was. He looked at the aircraft, and then he looked at me, and he asked me the question he had never once asked in 44 years. "I never asked you about your war, Hannah," he said. He could not quite look at me when he said it. "All these years, I asked your brother everything, and I never once asked you. I'd like to hear it. If you'll tell me, I'd like to know what my daughter did out there." I could have made him pay for that, too. I could have told him it was too little and too late, and it would have been true. But I have learned that being right and being free are not always the same direction, and I wanted to be free more than I wanted to be right. So I did not make him pay. I told him to come sit down. We sat on a bench at the edge of the tarmac, and I told my father about the worst night of my life. I told him about a valley I am still not permitted to name, and a team that was pinned down in it, and the call that came in the dark, and the decision to go in when the weather and the terrain and the enemy all said no. I told him about flying without lights between 2 ridgelines that reached up on either side, like hands trying to close around us, about Renee in the seat beside me, reading off numbers in a voice that never once broke. About putting that aircraft down in a space that should not have fit it while the world came apart around us, and about the men we carried out, some of them whole and some of them not, and the ones we got home alive who would not have seen another sunrise otherwise. I watched my father's face the whole time I told it, and for the first time in my entire life, he did not look like he was waiting for me to finish, so the conversation could move on to something he cared about more. He looked like a man learning, very late and at great cost, who his own child actually is. There were tears on his face by the end, and he did not wipe them away, and neither did I. Those were my brothers in those valleys, he said finally, his voice thick. For 30 years. And you were the one going in to get them. He shook his head slowly. I called it the safe choice. God help me, I called it safe. And then we talked about Daniel. Really talked, for the first time since we buried him. My father told me something I had never known, that after Daniel was killed, he had lain awake every night that I was deployed, sick with a terror he could not name and could not share. And that somewhere in there he had started, without ever deciding to, trying to push me toward a desk, toward anything that felt like it might keep me on the ground and alive. He had tried to make me smaller because he could not survive the thought of losing me the way he had lost my brother. I lost your brother to this, he said. And I think I tried to lose you to a desk so I wouldn't have to lose you for real. I told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting me. It was never that you couldn't do it, Hannah. I knew you could. I think I always knew you could. It's that I couldn't bear to watch you. So I just looked away. For 40 years, I looked away from my own daughter because I was a coward about my own grief, and I called it being careful, and I let you think it was about you. It did not fix it. I want to be honest about that, because I think the stories that pretend a single conversation can erase 40 years do a disservice to everyone who is living the real version. It did not fix it. The 40 years still happened. The commissioning he shook my hand at still happened. The lobby still happened. But something that had been locked my whole life came unlocked on that bench. And for the first time, my father and I were two adults telling each other the truth. And the distance between us, which had been measured in years for as long as I could remember, was suddenly measured in inches. You do not get the years back, but you would be amazed what you can build across a few inches once somebody finally closes the gap. Time moved on, the way it does. The seasons turned over, and life kept its ordinary shape. And slowly the new arrangement of things became visible, the way a photograph comes up in a developing tray, faint at first and then unmistakable. Master Sergeant Hunt deployed on the rotation I had signed him onto, and a few weeks into it, a short message reached me through official channels, forwarded along with a stack of routine traffic. It was brief, and it was not groveling, which is the only reason I believed it. Ma'am, it read. Did the job downrange? Tried to be the kind of team sergeant the sergeant major talked about. Stepped in twice when I saw somebody getting treated like they didn't belong. Thought you should know it took. Thank you for not making me the story. Hunt. I read it twice and then I let it go, and the last small weight of that night at the club went with it. He had become, it seemed, a little more than the man who blocked my path. That is all any of us can ask of each other, really. To become a little more than the worst thing we did on our worst night. And my father, who had gone 78 years without bragging about me, made up for lost time with a vengeance that would have been funny if it had not made me cry. Renee called me one evening, laughing and crying at the same time because she had been at the VFW and she had heard him do it. He had been sitting with his old circle, the men who had known him across his whole long career, and one of them had asked after his family and my father, instead of talking about Daniel the way he always had, instead of the practiced grief, had said, out loud, to a room full of old soldiers, that his daughter was a colonel, that she flew special operations missions, that she had pulled wounded men out of places these old men only whispered about. He had had 40 years to say it, and he finally said it, and I was not even in the room when it happened. I had to hear it secondhand from my best friend, both of us undone, over the phone. I sat at my kitchen table the night Renee told me that. The same table where I had signed Hunt's orders, the same table where I had sat at midnight and decided who I was going to be. And I noticed something I had not noticed in so long I had forgotten it was ever there. An absence. The old familiar weight that had sat on my chest my entire adult life. The brace, the readiness for the next dismissal, the muscle that was always half tensed for the moment someone would wave me toward the lobby. It was gone. I sat in my own kitchen in the quiet and I realized I had stopped flinching. And I did not yet know what to do with all the room that left in me, all that space that had been taken up for so long by the work of bracing. I only knew it was mine now, and that no one was going to take it back. Who are you when you finally stop getting ready to be overlooked? I did not have the answer yet, but for the first time in my life, I was genuinely curious to find out. There was a change of command ceremony at the end of that summer, a good one, a young commander I had mentored taking the colors, and I was there in my dress uniform as exactly who I am. No sweater this time, no hiding. I stood in the front row where I belonged, my rank on my collar and my wings on my chest and my own long record behind me. And I did not make myself small for 1 second of it. And in the rows set aside for family and guests in a good jacket with his hands folded in his lap sat my father, who had asked to come. I caught his eye once during the ceremony, and the look on his face was the look I had practiced not crying about at my commissioning 22 years before. The look I had waited my entire life to see. The simple, undisguised pride of a father watching his child and finding her remarkable. It came 22 years late. I had stopped needing it by the time it arrived, and it was still, I will not pretend otherwise, one of the best moments of my life. Afterward, he and I went fishing, which is a thing we do now, the two of us, on quiet weekends. It is not dramatic. He is just my dad now, an old soldier in a folding chair with a line in the water, asking me questions, and, the new part, listening to the answers. That afternoon, watching his bobber drift, he said, without looking at me, "I should have been bragging about you for 20 years. I wasted 20 years I could have spent being the most insufferable old man at the VFW about my daughter, the colonel." He shook his head. "I'm going to be insufferable about it now, to make up the difference, fair warning." "Take your time, old man," I told him. "I'm not going anywhere." And I am not. That is the part I would not have believed, in the worst of those years. That I would come out the other side of all of it, not bitter, not hard, not turned into one of the people who hurt me, but lighter, free, sitting beside the man who could not see me for 40 years, and finding that I had enough room in me now to let him learn. The young warrant officer, the one from the parking lot, made captain of her own little corner of the world not long after, and she came to find me to tell me, and she told me there were 2 more behind her now, who came to her the way she had come to me. That is how it works, if you let it. You hold the gate open, and the next one holds it open, and eventually nobody can remember that there was ever a time the gate was closed. You do not win this by becoming the gatekeeper. You win it by refusing to be one. So here is what I know now, after all of it. After the gravel road and the silent table, and the commissioning and the valleys and the lobby and the long road back to my own father. You do not have to make someone else small in order to prove that you are not. The man who blocked my path that night did it because somewhere along the way, someone made him feel small, and he had learned the only cure he knew, which was to do it to somebody else. It is a closed loop, and the only way out of it is to refuse to pass it on. I had the pen in my hand. I had the power to do to him exactly what had been done to me my whole life. And the freest I have ever felt was the morning I signed his orders fair, and did not. The work was always enough. It was enough when no one was watching and no one was clapping and no one in my own family thought to ask. I was always enough. I just spent too many years waiting for the people who overlooked me to finally hand me that truth, when it was mine to give myself the entire time. So if you have ever been the person standing in the doorway in the plain sweater, if you have ever been told, in words or in 1,000 small silences, to go wait in the lobby while the people who matter talk among themselves, then let me be the one to tell you what I wish someone had told me at 16, at the edge of that field, watching the helicopters and afraid to want them out loud. Walk in, set your glass down, and plant your feet, and do not move. You do not need anyone in that room to introduce you. You belong in the room, you always did. And the day you finally believe that, all the way down you will find you can see yourself just fine, with or without them, and no one will ever be able to send you to the lobby again. I am Colonel Hannah Jackson. I fly when I can, into quiet skies for no reason but the love of it. And I am, at long last, exactly where I belong. That night at the bar taught me something I'd waited my whole life to learn, that I never had to make anyone else small to prove I wasn't. I signed that man's orders, fair, and I let the truth do the rest. If someone in your own family has ever overlooked everything you built, I'd really like to hear about it in the comments. Did you stay in the room, or did you walk out? And would you have signed those orders the way I did? If this story hit home for you, hit subscribe and stay a while. I read every comment and I'll be right here.